cottages. And each village or town on Fire Island had its own personality along with who was welcome and who was not. And throughout the development of Fire Island, Robert Moses, working as the Long Island Park Manager, having great success building his parks and parkways east and west and south across the country. He was also able to build Jones Beach State Park, along with the Fire Island State Park in 1908 or so, now known as Robert Moses State Park. And Robert Moses, for decades, was able to, Moses' plan for decades was to extend the Ocean Parkway, which was started and stopped at Fire Island State Park right through Fire Island. Moses' goal, same as most of his parkway building, was to bring driving and recreation to the barrier islands. And his sales pitch was that by building the Ocean Parkway highway extension, he would be making Fire Island more storm resilient, strengthening the barrier island and protecting the south shore of Long Island from weather events. And that kind of map there shows you the continuation of the Ocean Parkway from the west end of the island to basically out to the Hamptons. So what you're seeing here is the current end of the Ocean Parkway at the end of Robert Moses State Park. And then, if the highway were to continue basically acquiring the land bit by bit, it would wipe out existing villages all the way east down Fire Island, extending all the way to the Chicago Inlet to Hampton Bays. So we all know how this turned out because we're all here. Fortunately, the Fire Island community beat Moses by organizing and demanding the U.S. Department of Interior declare the Fire Island a national seashore, which LBJ did in 1960. It's one of the 10 national seashores federally protected to protect coastline resources from excessive development and provide public use and development. Today, Fire Island's density is more closely related to urban environments, in our opinion, than rural or suburban, so that in a way, our Fire Island work, we think, benefits from our city. Okay. Fire Island is unique that most visitors use the seafaring equivalent of our subway Fire Island ferry. With few exceptions and seasonal regulation, no cars or trucks are permitted on Fire Island. And so the boats, maybe some of you have seen these before, but they're very distinct. They haven't changed in decades, with names that make sure that you know where you're going. And leaving on the ferry is the ultimate detachment for vacation goers and architects like business. The boat is a little bit of a social equalizer, similar to the subway, with few exceptions. Everyone from day trippers, laborers, to longtime vacation homeowners use the ferry. This is a quick little. We're very lucky to be able to do this. And usually you can see some friends on the boat over too. It's kind of a casual detachment. And this is from our trip this summer, our day trip. And then when owners arrive, usually off the ferries, they load up their wagons, they walk to their houses, and they bring everything up their ramps. So with no cars to the island, everything must be shipped by boat. So this is where kind of the construction conversation comes into play. So it's a huge logistical challenge to get everything out there. This is more or less the only crane. There's a couple freight boats, but this is more or less the only crane that's kind of available for house building. Everything is taken to one or two ferry points, put on freight barges, and taken over to the beach. And so there's no cranes on the beach, no concrete trucks, because it's impossible to kind of fit down the narrow walkways of the village ends. So everything needed to build a house would be put on a freight boat, obviously limiting materials and methods. So if you have to build, a conventional wood frame, we still try to find ways to make things special and extraordinary, knowing we're limited to using ordinary methods. We avoid using concrete approach. The effort to get the trucks is a little excessive. You can't really go anywhere, but one day we were out there and we actually saw a concrete truck being floated over on a barge to the island, and I was like, this is crazy. It does happen out there, but it's pretty rare that something like that happens. And then obviously without trucks on the beach, contractors have adapted their carts and trailers to become mobile shops and hauling devices. The largest constraint from the boat is getting materials to the site, with only golf carts and freight trailers to pull items down narrow walks and lanes. So this is how most material gets to houses and gets taken away from houses. And it all goes bit by bit. And then a lot of contractors and tradesmen use smaller wagons to kind of bring their equipment from the boats to project sites. And then everybody uses a bike, including the architects. And so this is how, like when we do site visits, this is kind of like what it is. We kind of go house to house, and we put our stuff in the basket, and we just, it's pretty cool. And then contractor golf carts, for VIPs and clients. Okay, so we're going to bounce back and forth.
Oh, so this is the underside of the house. This is the foundation of a typical house up there, and they're all built on poles because we got to meet FEMA base flood elevations. But then this provides a space for the contractors to work. They can create a workshop, they can store materials, they use the space underneath, which is great because there's a limit of spaces they can use on the island otherwise. So here's a temporary, job site workshop set up and then we just wanted to include a quick video of how these foundations go in. They're pretty low tech, but they get water jetted in, use a mini excavator to move the pole over. They liquefy the sand really quickly, and they just slide the pole in with sort of, we call it moderate precision. So, and that's your house foundation. And this is why. So this is one FEMA map of one part of Fire Island. So FEMA sets the height with the federal insurance. I'll get there. NFIP, National Federal. Anyway, insurance program. So they want to make sure people can have their houses insured, and that it doesn't float away and cause more damage to other houses. The heights on the island usually range from something to 7 feet above sea level up to 20 feet or more above sea level, depending how close to the beach you are, and whether your house might get wave action or not in the storm, the worst case storm. So this is something we have to look at for every house. This is also sort of a quick overview of the kind of complexity of other administration regulations we have to deal with out there. The village of Ocean Beach is actually the only incorporated village on the island that has its own zoning code and building code. The rest of the villages are either part of Islip, the mainland town of Islip, or Brookhaven. So if we're working on a house a few blocks away, we have to file our job with Brookhaven. If we're on the other side of Ocean Beach or in Seaview, it's with Islip. If we have certain environmental regulations involved, first we have to go to the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And then if you're doing a new septic system, if only Ocean Beach has a sewer system, then we have to file something with the Suffolk County Health Department. So that's just a quick overview of some of the regulatory constraints we deal with. And that's part of this bigger kind of Venn diagram type together, talking about constraints. These are things that every architect has to deal with on most projects. There's certain regulatory bodies we have to deal with. And then there's sort of the special local constraints that are specific to Fire Island, and maybe other beach communities, like having to get everything over on a ferry boat. And then there's also sort of what we call like the spirit of Fire Island, and how the people live out there, how their habits influence how they use houses and the wagons and the ramps. And they have to get up to this house that's 10 feet up in the air. Going to the beach, everyone is very particular about their beach habits, whether they live on Fire Island or not. How how particular are you about keeping sand out of the house? Do you take your shower outside or inside, et cetera, et cetera. So, but besides the constraints, we wanted to show there are also opportunities, right? So that's how we derive the architecture, that's how we design the houses. And then we also have this wonderful tradition of modern architecture out on Fire Island, which is something that really inspires our work a lot. There's two architects in particular that are very good precedents for us. Andrew Geller being one, who did some very experimental and then some very sometimes more conventional architecture, but on the beach, luckily he tended to, go for it. Like this double deck box kite house. A lot of them have moving parts. They closed up for the winter. A lot of them you'd be lucky to see if they lasted to the next summer. And then Horace Gifford might be one of the more well-known architects out there. Designed something like 40 houses out on Fire Island. These houses did not have to meet the same regulations that we have to today. They didn't have to meet energy codes. They do huge single pane plate glass site-made windows that didn't have to be protected from the 100-year storm like ours do now. But they were very well suited to the Fire Island lifestyle, and obviously they're very good representations of a beach house and kind of like the ease and the freedom we think people feel when they're out there. So this is a tradition we aim to build on. So from that, we're going to show you 6 of our houses and how we have tried to navigate some of these constraints and opportunities out there. This was the first house that we did out on Fire Island, finished in 2020 on Juniper Street. So we, desperately tried to get it perfect. So what we find out there working with clients is a lot of the houses are passed down through the generations. They started out as small beach shacks, and now the family has grown. So the beach shack no longer accommodates the couple who is now grandparents. So they need a larger house, and we try to listen to their needs and work with what we can out there. So this house in particular, we paid special attention from the planning point of view. And this is the site, which is in Seaview. And this are the planning diagrams we used. We had to fit a pool with that, a house, and a septic system on this lot. From zoning and optimal siting arrangements, we ended up with the pool on the south side of the lot, house on the north, septic to the west. To get the best sun on the pool and in the house. Then the septic system had to be raised above ground because groundwater was too close. Then it needed to push north, so the house became an L and started to wrap around the street side of the pool. This diagram is lifting the house to the seam of height and then taking the L, and we sort of shifted the second floor volume to create some shade for the first floor volume, and then just adding in the circulation. What does that do to the form of the house? In this case, we added a hallway on the second floor to provide privacy for the bedrooms and bathrooms from the pool deck area. And then the vertical circulation sort of becomes the hinge between these two volumes of the L that connects them and yet also separates the guest spaces from the family spaces. Extreme weather is something we also have to deal with out there. Weather conditions are on Fire Island are very hard on materials. Cedar siding is a typical material to use on beach houses, but if untreated, it oxidizes, it weathers and silvers, and without cleaning and resealing it, and having ideal conditions, it can turn dark and discolored of course, all the clients want this traditional fire island silver beach house look that's it's difficult to maintain, especially if it's a seasonal house. So what we experimented with this house was looking at a Shusugiban siding, which is an ancient Japanese technique of charring the wood, the outside of the wood, which already oxidizes it and protects the inside from rot, from water, from UV, from insects. And in addition to that, we used a wood that is treated already called Akoya. It's a product that basically uses something just similar to vinegar, which also makes it more durable and resistant to rot and all of that. So essentially, weathered material wrapped the house in that instead of waiting for the sunlight and the weather to do that for us. So instead of the silver beach house, we get this kind of black, highly grained wood exterior. So it's sort of a twist on the classic beach house look out there. And then we use a lighter finish of the same siding at insets and recesses to sort of highlight the shifts in the volumes of the house. Functionally, the client wanted the living spaces to be off the deck and the pool, because traditionally houses on fire island were AC free, windows open all the time, and so there became a connection inside and outside, and the deck became just part of the living space of the interior. So this is something we also tried to do for this house. So the deck and pool are right off the living spaces and the main part of the house. They're connected, but also a little disconnected to create their own outdoor program spaces. We had to cut into the deck to not go over the site coverage, and then that allowed us to also put the outdoor shower out here sited for maximum privacy. And that's a view from the pool, looking towards the house. And this is inside the house, looking out towards that outdoor space. And then you can see on some of these, although the houses are quite close, in a lot of cases, and I always try to use a lot of glass for this sort of indoor-outdoor living, because the island has a lot of vegetation, you can still get quite a bit of privacy, even though sometimes houses are 20 feet away from each other or less. And that's universe.
And so the second house is, we call it the Michigan house. There's actually several Michigan houses now. But this one, all of our houses kind of came on kind of a relationship building. And it's a very small community out there. And the builders all know the customers and the builders know the architects. And so a lot of times our names get kind of passed to person. So the builder that we worked with passed our name to the owners of this Michigan house. And this house is sited in Seaview. So this was actually an interesting siting situation. It's right on the edge of the beach. Prior to Hurricane Superstorm Sandy, it was not a beachfront house. And after Sandy, I don't know if it was the state or the federal government, basically bought out several lots that were oceanside of our project site. And so, kind of like by default, our clients became oceanfront households. And so this is the view from basically their old house and their old deck. And this is what their old house looked like. And their house, this cute little bungalow, we think it might have been, it was floated over from Long Island. We think maybe it was floated over possibly when Robert Moses' Parkway, he said it had to be moved from a highway construction. So the house was over like 50 years old. And it's the same issue as the first house. It's kind of a generational replacement type of project. The clients requested like a modern house, but they were definitely attached to the bungalow aesthetic of this house, and they kind of requested that their house, the new house, incorporate some kind of like interesting roof lines. And so we kind of like took that and we did our quick little zoning and planning study. Again, like all of these lots are relatively small. All of the setbacks contain the houses in a relatively square box. All of the houses more or less are moderately sized. They're not, this is not a Hampton situation. And our initial study looked at basically like cranking the house away from the water parallel. For a couple reasons. One, there's kind of the house to the west that kind of stuck out forward of it. And two, we thought it might be interesting to kind of like give them kind of like a perspective view of the ocean as opposed to kind of a head-on parallel view of the ocean. So we kind of cranked the house, and we filled out the volume, and as we kind of like showed it to them, one of the clients was like, "Oh, it's kind of like opening like a Tootsie Roll. We kind of like twisted the house a little bit." And I was like, "Yeah, it's kind of like that." And so we kind of like ran with that a little bit. It's the concept idea, and started to kind of like form the house in a little more detail. You can see here kind of the original kind of like massing model, and then we tried to kind of like develop more roof lines and kind of work with some of these cuts and shapes. So we kind of had more of like an eroded bar box that kind of became more programmatic. And then you can see here, this is how the house starts to look from the neighbor's house. And you can see the kind of the two parallel walls. One's on the ocean side, and one's on the bay side, but the opposite kind of triangulation. And if you kind of fill in that kind of space in between, you get this kind of like cross-twisted roof line. And that became kind of like the signature kind of like look for this house. We also kind of thought about the house as kind of this boat, you know, from the other side sailing across the dunes, because from the north side it's a very kind of like hidden type of house, but the ocean side is completely exposed. You know, this kind of vision of the house sailing across the dunes was something that was interesting with this kind of sharp prow. We were also interested in the obliqueness of the building because of the angular cuts, and we had you know, some studies done where we looked at the different ramp locations and deck locations that kind of parallel out the plan. And so this is how the house kind of like comes together now. It's all clad in cedar. It has some kind of like features in the front which start to announce the entry to the house, the public spaces of the house, and then you know how we regulate the windows and the openings of the house, which is kind of like a whole design exercise in and of itself. You definitely had to consider privacy for the house because everybody on the beach would have been able to see into the house just as much as they wanted to be able to see the fullness of the beach. So there was also a boardwalk that kind of connected this particular beach to Michigan Street. And everybody going over this boardwalk would have kind of been like looking right to the house. So we were able to save some cedar trees on the corner of the property, which provided some isolation from inside the house and from outside the house. And this is the view that they kind of have looking out at the beach now. And how we kind of tucked the kitchen under the stair and started to bring some of these warmer material elements into the house to pick up on some other Fire Island elements. Traditionally, Fire Island kind of houses did not have or did not be currently energy codes. Before kind of sheetrock became prevalent, all the houses were clad on the inside in cedar, and some of the houses may not even have been clad on the inside. They had just been the cedar siding on the outside of the framing. So these on the left are a couple of images of traditional Fire Island houses, and then how we try to incorporate some of the wood and the fir strips and cedar inside, kind of bring that characteristic back. And we were kind of fortunate with this one that the client was like interested in having this kind of feel inside the house. So we were able to work with the wood in like an opposite way that like value-wise you might have to work with sheetrock. So we were able to kind of like accent the wood with sheetrock as opposed to like using the wood as the accent piece. And so this is kind of the view up in like the main prow of the ship. This is their kind of like den, where you really start to read the pointiness of the house and kind of the space of the roof as it kind of hinges at that point. So
the clients for this house were directly behind the house you just saw. And they knew work would be done in front of their house, and they also had a neighbor across the street also tearing down their house and building a new house. So they came to us and said, what's going to happen to our view, basically. And so we tried to show them this is, there it is again. And that was their view after Sandy. Again, the house was gone on the other side of Traffic Avenue. So that was the old version of the previous house we were talking about, and this is the other one that was about to be replaced. So you can see why they wanted to preserve this. So we did a little visualization exercise. This is a little bit more dramatic than what it was, but more or less what they would be left with. Again, this is the other little previous cottage bungalow, and this is now the other house we're talking about behind it. And that's the new version of the previous house. So this is what was going to happen to their view. And this is kind of what we showed them they could expect, and you can see this other new house being built here. And this was sort of like what we thought would be the best case scenario. And after they were a little shocked and maybe saddened and maybe a little mad, they came back to us and said, okay, we also are considering some work, some renovation. How can we get more of our beach view back? So luckily we looked at the massing of their house, we looked at their zoning. They had a little extra room to the east of their house. So we said we need to stretch your house longer towards the street so you can get the view down the road again. So we proposed adding a little to the north and to the east. We just basically stretched what they had out, playing with the sort of stacked composition they had. And we also, in the process, flipped the layout of their second floor. This is an upside-down house. The bedrooms are on the first floor, and upstairs is kitchen, living, dining room. But the kitchen before was on the east side, where now we wanted to capture more view, so we flipped that layout. Which essentially meant we had to rebuild the whole second floor, also because it wasn't built so great before, which is something we come across a lot on Fire Island. But so all the new red part was added or rebuilt. So again, just like working with the design language that was already there, extending these like stacked planes of volumes, we softened them a bit with some curves. And then here you can see after they ripped off the second floor, small fragment of the house that remained, and then slowly over the winter, what we added and extended, and then at some point, the second floor was framed up, but everything was protected, and no one could really see the view until ta-da, later. So it's pretty close to what we showed them, the new deck, and then this is inside the new living space. That same view. And then this is that east street side facade, where also this deck is extended further east. So that's the sweet spot here. And then we played with some alternating siding direction that helps to emphasize the composition, the stacking. And then this is the west side of the house, where it's a little more of an austere kind of sculptural facade because of privacy, less windows, with the wagon, and that's the second Michigan house.
So this house is a couple blocks away from those two houses. This is a house on Champlain Street. Again, the clients kind of like found us through some contacts. We're kind of in Ocean Bay Park now, which is a few blocks to the east. And this project was a little interesting. This was one of the first times we worked on a site without a house on it that had to be either torn down or modified. The clients were actually two sisters, they had an open lot and they wanted to build a house, and they had a very interesting neighbor who was their mother. So this is their mother's beach cottage, and this is where they basically spent their summers on Fire Island, and kind of where they like cultivated their kind of like love for the beach. So we had to be a little bit sensitive about not just like kind of like meeting their needs as clients, but also kind of like not offending, you know, their mother. The houses, both of the lots were particularly narrow, so it was a tough thing to accomplish. But what we did is we started out basically like we always do with kind of zoning diagrams, thinking about how we can inject a little Fire Island personality into each house. And now what's happening is that the houses are getting bigger and bigger and taller, and everybody wants to accommodate for like future generations. So it gets really hard to play with the personalities of the houses and the sculpture of the houses without slamming the edge of the design up to the zoning envelope. So in this particular case, the design was made more interesting by the two sisters' desire for what we started calling like hybrid spaces. So they, in particular, really wanted to incorporate outdoor screened-in porches for like indoor-outdoor living out there. And so we kind of started with this kind of larger box to work with, and then voided basically like the opposite corners of the box, on top and bottom, and the front and the back. And we more or less assigned each of these voids like a hybrid program space. So whether they were screened porches or indoor eating grilling areas, or the entry, or a reading zone, or in particular this one, the outdoor shower, all of these corners kind of became this useful feature of the house. And they were all kind of complemented by some of the indoor planning features, like for instance, at the front of the house, this zone here, which is the big outdoor living room, was kind of complemented next to this nice eating nook, and the grill area back here was kind of complemented by the kitchen. And then this corner down here, the opposite became the reading, kind of like crash nook. Down here, the entry was complemented by the shower, which kind of was this volume that was like extracted out and pushed into the back. So each of these kind of like spaces created this nice kind of like harmony with this kind of like indoor neighbor space. And here you can see kind of some of these indoor spaces being like framed up, and they already start to have this like character of like inside and outside. And then what the massing starts to feel like once you see the box start to come to life with the corners chunked out of it. This house was also interesting because it's one of the few houses that we worked on out there that has large trees that were able to be held and kept intact during construction. And so from the street side, the trees really do screen the upper and lower corners of the house where the screened-in porches are. So it gives them like quite a bit of privacy, and you're up in the green, which is really nice. And then on the back of the house, it's very exposed. So we kind of thought of this a little bit as like a very like serious house up front, kind of like a little party house in the back, where you can kind of like play with the composition of the windows, things like that. And on the back, you can see in the upper left is kind of the outdoor eating space, and in the bottom right is the outdoor shower space. And then this is kind of the entry zone where we kind of carve out. We always try and kind of like give a little emphasis to the entry and the decompression space. You carve out of the space before you enter the house. And then a further carve, like, carving out a bench for sitting and taking off shoes before you go into the house. And some more views of the cutout space. And the adjacent kind of like eating and indoor-outdoor space kind of complement each other. The sisters were really particular about the outdoor shower setup. They wanted one shower inside the house. And usually, with most new houses out there, it's like, how many bathrooms can we get in here? How can we max this out? And they were very particular. They said, we want one inside shower. We want one really nice outside shower. Because everybody at the beach who knows what they're doing showers outside in their outdoor shower. So they asked for the shower to be like, particularly nice. So it has like a nice changing room. It has kind of a screen, so that there's privacy from above. And I think at one point there was like mention of like cocktail window, secret door, pass-through door. Yeah. So it was nice to see like this sort of thing celebrated, like an outdoor shower that was celebrated. And they also brought some like unique personal features to the house. One of the sisters lives out in Oakland, and she was interested in doing a mosaic octopus for the house. So she kind of like crafted it in Oakland, and she spent like months putting this together, and like extremely like picky about like what pieces go where. To the point where it was ready to basically ship back out east, and she brought it out with her. There's one of the clients is sitting with the octopus ready to go into the house, and it really turned out quite lovely in this case. And I think the octopus is named.
Okay. So our next house is on Surf Road in Ocean Beach, incorporated village of Ocean Beach. This also came through previous clients' recommendations. This was another unique site right on beachfront. So this was the existing house. It barely survived Sandy. But eventually the dune was rebuilt, and that's how it looked. Very small, looks like it was never designed to be a beachfront house. It didn't face the ocean. There were a few small windows. Faced west, it was not compliant with zoning. It was not raised to the correct FEMA height. So, the little house had to go. This particular house is pretty challenging because we were found to be in this coastal erosion hazard area. So in this case, the New York State had jurisdiction, the Department of Environmental Conservation, about whether we could in fact build anything new here or not. Luckily, the DEC allows properties a one-time variance to do a up to 25% increase in the ground floor area of what they call a non-major addition. So we took that existing house, we added in what area we could, and made it compliant with the zoning setbacks, and this is what we ended up with. And the DCC also sort of prioritizes and emphasizes that if you can push anything landward, away from the dunes and away from the ocean, they definitely like that. So the resulting house also luckily ended up in a longer house that was better oriented toward the south, for the sun, and also toward the beach. In particular, the client wanted to max out their building envelope, so we had a really tight zoning envelope and not a lot of wiggle room, and we really struggled with how do we make this house interesting and not make it a box. So first, obviously we wanted to maximize the view of the ocean, and then we had to look at elevationally how do we give this house a little personality. So we started looking at regulation lines, and how do we make this not only work with the floor plan, but also add some depth to the house. So first, we cut it into horizontal bands, and then we looked at creating some vertical bands within those. And we looked at inspiration yet again, like a Horace Gifford house. We can't do these 10 by 15 foot plate glass windows, but how do we pursue something called a decorated box? So here you can basically see under construction, this is like the zoning envelope. It's just a box. And then this is built. So what we did is we created these horizontals. We added in a really wide awning, Voorhees Soleil at the first floor. We created a deep soffit at the roof. We took vertical trim, like piers, and pulled them out that didn't those horizontal. So obviously with the sun coming this direction, we get some really great shadow lines. You can see these horizontal and verticals, how they come into play. You want to read the time of day because the sun travels across the house. Shadow lines take an effect, but kind of like if you took a highlighter to the facade. And then at dusk, that effect kind of goes away, and you get a little bit of the opposite effect, the lantern of the house glowing outward. Another interesting zoning unique quality for Ocean Beach is they require second means of exterior egress from two-story house all the way down to the sand. So we kind of took that opportunity to play with, a second volume that could create some balance. Here we paired a spiral stair with the outdoor shower, and then we pulled awning down on the left side. You can see that here in vertical battens, they also help provide privacy from, again, the walkway to the beach, which is right adjacent to the property. Playing with these ideas of vertical or horizontal strips of wood, battens. In this house in particular, I think our finished floor was 22 feet above sea level. So quite a huge ramp. So we use the same battens on the railings to give that the ramp and the stair here the feel of a little more mass as opposed to a totally transparent rail. Help break down the larger mass of the house from the street. And this is just a view of that awning and the Voorhees Soleil and how it comes down vertically at the end of the deck. And then we took that same idea of the wood strips inside. It looks like it continues inside into the ceiling. Same there. And then yet again, trying to infuse the house with a little more of the classic fire island wood interior, warm, like a cabin on the sea. And playing again with the wood battens, stair railing, just repeating elements wherever we can to strengthen the design. That's the view. Yeah.
They were doing it here. This is the last house. This is a fun one. It's not built, so hopefully this goes into construction next summer. This was another one that came from the houses we did out there. Another oceanfront house. This one all the way at the end of Ocean Bay Park. So this is kind of like the furthest east we've done a house, which is still like a half mile away from all the other houses. And this is the view from their current bungalow, their current cottage right now. They're right. I feel like they're even like closer on the dunes than either of the other beachfront houses. The house is this very quaint cottage bungalow, the clients basically had two wishes. One, make a modern addition. Two, keep the charm of the existing cottage. So we were like, well, how do we kind of like put the two together? So before we kind of get to the how do you resolve the two opposites, again, looking at where we can build. Like a lot of this stuff is not unlike doing zoning diagrams in New York City. Okay? Like if anybody's ever done like a ZP diagram, like this stuff is like there's a big parallel here in how we have to approach these projects. The existing house was actually sited due south of the buildable envelope and was kind of grandfathered into the zoning just because of how long it's been there. But the buildable area is actually most of it's north of the house or behind the house. And they had this kind of like weird trapezoidal lot. The existing cottage couldn't really be expanded due to its location relative to the setbacks. The only buildable area was behind it. So, you know, we kind of approached it real quick as like, well, whatever we do, it's going to go on the other side of the house, behind the house. And it should be separated from the house somehow. And if we kind of pull it as far east as we can give it the most views around the existing bungalow as possible. And so we also thought about it sectionally, and so for this particular addition, because it's rather large, we are going to kind of like bring it up to FEMA compliance. So it'll have a nice feature where it'll be like towering over the bungalow house. And the client kind of encouraged us to think about this a bit of a tower, which was kind of an interesting problem. So we went back and looked at some Fire Island precedents, and this is the Seungho house that was done by Andrew Geller. And it's actually been removed. It was in really bad state, but it was basically a tower type of house with these breezeways connected. So there's always like precedent to kind of find out. So we kind of like thought about the tower, this tall, skinny thing, make it as tall as we can. And also knowing that you have to connect any addition to the main house. So everything has to be connected with interior space out there. We did some massing studies for them. Of course, these don't show the existing cottage in place, so we really tried to like think about this as its own entity without kind of like corrupting it to the cottage from the beginning. And kind of understood that like having like a dislocated and aesthetically like contrasting addition created a challenge. So it's kind of like a two-body problem, where the addition could be like dominant or subservient or old or new. So it's like how do you kind of like respect and enhance at the same time. So a good problem to have, but the question was like, well, what is this thing going to look like? So ultimately, we decided to like reinterpret the existing cottage's design language, these roof lines and these eaves, this lowness, and kind of extract a little bit of like DNA from the cottage. And then what would happen if we kind of like rotated that DNA vertically and still kind of like held some of these subtle angles in place. And then the result is some kind of like tower that kind of sits behind it, like off to the side, somebody maybe looking over your shoulder, but maybe it's still somebody in your family. So we could achieve kind of a complementary shape in a modern aesthetic using the same lines. And then from the back of the house, as you kind of approach towards the front, we also thought about how some of these lines and some of this DNA of the cottage could not just relate maybe elevationally, but also how we could take some of those lines and carve away at the massing three-dimensionally, and let that kind of like DNA work in a different way as opposed to just orthographic. And so this one, we're going to try and take a little bit of a different approach to the wooden side and use kind of plywood panels. The clients, one of them is an artist and has some amazing painting work, and none of it's kind of shown here. But the idea is this is kind of part gallery, part addition, and they're able to kind of like showcase and work out of the digital. And so that's kind of what the vibe would be maybe at night, and maybe that's 2 years from now.
Thank you, Paul and Eddie, for sharing all of these beautiful works. I have some of my thoughts written down the note, so I want to share with the audience first, and then maybe open up for questions. I see a lot of students joined here today, so I'd love to hear from the students. And I have a list of questions, but I'll do one, and then maybe Professor Claudia Hernandez can also share a few questions afterwards. So, you began your presentation with the idea of genius loci, the spirit of place. For me, the spirit isn't just something found on the site. It begins much earlier in the journey. When I visited Fire Island with Paul and Claudia this summer, what's memorable for me wasn't only the buildings and job sites, but the long train ride the gradual change of scenery, and even the shift in mindset as we arrived at this mysterious island without cars. And seeing your projects after that experience gave me a much better understanding of where your design is coming from. And I'd encourage everyone to visit the island to feel the otherworldly nature of the neighborhood. Maybe we can form a field trip for next semester. And I'm working on the spring semester workshop lineup, so maybe we can plan for one. Kind of putting you on the spot. It also made me think about how materials have their own journeys, how they travel to become an architecture. Something we often overlook in dense urban settings, especially the supply chains are hidden. And your work reminded me that architecture is ultimately the act of assembly, bringing together things and people and also ideas. And finally, I always tell my students that constraints aren't obstacles, and it's more of a thing to play with, and they're like catalysts. And the extraordinary constraints you introduced today clearly shape something both functional and elegant. So thank you again for inviting us to the job sites and taking the time to share your work with us today. On that note, I'd like to lead to my question on constraints. So what lessons, I'm sure you have a lot of lessons learned from dealing with all these extraordinary constraints on the island. What lessons from Fire Island's unique and stringent constraints have influenced your approach to projects in denser urban contexts, like Brooklyn and Manhattan, outside of the island? For example, timber seems to be a recurring material in your work, and beyond its aesthetic and logistical benefits, do you see it as part of a broader decarbonization strategy, or any other learnings that has been applied to your other projects out of the island?
So timber. I mean, when we think of timber, we think about like conventional wood framing, and I think that in terms of like decarbonizing, we're not trying to do anything out there. We're not trying to do anything that's going to cause a lot of huge logistical issues. And the one picture of like the boat stacked with all the framing is like the perfect example. I think, funny enough, when a lot of the Andrew Geller houses, as far as Gifford houses, were built out there, and even like the shacks and stuff, they're all built with like a very temporary perspective. And they were built like a little on the fly, and they were built in a way that if they disappeared during the storm one year, it was like a big deal, but not that big. So like even the materiality of it, wasn't anything that they intended on lasting forever. So I think that's a good thing. I think building with the small stuff. I think that in terms of like we're using like an easy growing material for most of the houses.
Yeah, because when we were out at the site, we were talking about prefabrication and modularization and standardization of these projects, even like an idea of design build, firm that can actually handle all these logistical issues. And I wonder, like, being exposed to these like constraints actually gave you fresh ideas about how you approach regular and typical buildings in like urban area like we have in downtown.
I mean, and funny enough, I think like the opposite kind of happened. Like the whole reason I was introduced to Fire Island years ago was we were going to do a house that was going to be prefabricated, so built on the mainland, floated over, and the site happened to be on the bay on a bulkhead, so it was like feasibly possible to do that. And at the end of the day, the contractors out there, they were like, well, we're not doing that. We're going to do it how we do it. And now, as it turns out, like we're doing a prefab building in Bushwick, right? So I can't say that one influences the other, but definitely sort of to train your brain thinking about logistics.
It's very interesting because I also think you being outside and then using what's available as materials, I think that also speaks about decarbonization in a way because logistical chain always involve more carbon, right, during the process, and maybe the ethos of fire island projects are more to use what's available near you, and therefore reducing the carbon emission. Whereas, like, if you come back to downtown project, it's more of taking advantage of what's available, and then you're being efficient with managing carbon. So maybe you've got more insights on the differences, and then maybe you have clear strategies now for both types of projects.
Yeah, and I think even like all the houses and builders out there use like 2 or 3 local supply houses that do conventional construction. So all the materials like sitting right there. It's not something that's coming from. I think the most exotic material we used out there was the Shushu Yuan wave. That was produced in Europe, and it was sent to Pennsylvania for firing and then shipped to Fire Island. That's a lot of hurdles, and it's an expensive material. But if you just go and buy cedar siding, and you think about maybe a more interesting way to install it, or you look at some Fire Island precedents, I think you can achieve like an equally interesting product.
Yeah.
Right. First of all, I met the local before I was still much in this class. First of all, I should compliment you on that farming practice. With, let's say, challenging clients. This is an academic presentation, and another question I have is the area of your description of the history of Fire Island represents a move away from the innocence of Fire Island to a constructed urban depression and infrastructure and place of fire. And when you look at the site plan, it looks more like Brooklyn than it does Fire Island. So as you explore it, and opportunity, you spend a lot of time, have you thought about how you build to provide prototypes to deal with the issues of Fire Island while still maintaining your client base? And it seems, the discussion you had with us is very much a client architect discussion. So if we were all in the house beautiful, we'd be talking about keeping it private. But as architects, future architects, what are the potential environmental issues that challenge the island because of our imposition of it? And how is the designing now legally adaptable to perpetuate models that will allow the island to exist? I think that's the question that I have. You're there, and I think it has to be something that has to be accomplished so that our island can survive.
Yeah, and so it's a huge conflict for us personally. If we were our own clients, we would do things different. Unfortunately.
That's a good question,
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Who is your client? Is it the planet? Is it Fire Island? Or is it the mother?
Days, it's the kids who need mountains kept feed. Yeah,
You will get it that you've conquered a practice in a very difficult and unique environment. But
let me put it this way: our ideal client is somebody that comes to us and says, "I want an interesting house that's going to treat the island right, and I don't need it to be as big as."
that's the statement. If you can make yourself, then approach the client.
You could ask, yes.
So again, as on an academic day, you should pick, West Hampton, Southampton, far more stringent requirements to avoid development as opposed to sustain development. Fire Island, Barrier Island, has the worst of all circumstances. Why we compared to them. So again, just between us guys, if we were to look at what is the mechanism? And again, this is one philosophical question. To develop prototypes which answer the client's needs, but start to roll back, the proposed damage that this last 50 years of development of fire like that. So I don't know. I know there's no answer, and I know I'm being an asshole asking the question in this situation. But it's an academic environment. This is the kind of question we have to meet. If we were meeting in solely and talking about your latest book, we can talk in a different way. But I admire the work you do as a photographer here, and I admire your survival rate, because these fires are not easy. But on the greater portion of the students, what happens next? How do you break the cycle? How do you do responsible things yet achieve the happiness of your client? You play the restoration drill and survival of Barrier Island, which has tremendous responsibility to make it there. So there's no answer to the question, but I feel the obligation to sort of mention it without being too much of an asshole. So thanks very much for the presentation. I think everyone benefits from it. And I'm such a pleased to have you back. Now I can run home today.
Yeah, I have maybe a little bit different, maybe related. One of my questions was, like, how do you envision your practice evolving in time, right? And I think that this is a good question. You know, something that's really interesting to me is basically, many of my trainees have a really tough time getting work, you know, so but you seem to sort of really and being able to stay in your practice and do well, but also do interesting work. And so, how do you see now that you've established this pattern and started to create these relationships? So, one question is, how do you see your evolving in the future? Like, if you had to invest in a kid, so I'm curious what you're starting to do that again. No, I think it's an interesting question, right? Because it takes a while to get an office off the ground, and then once you're like settled, I know that you talked about, well, maybe it's not only about being an architect of the entire island, and you didn't talk about some of your work, you're also doing technical work in Brooklyn, right? And another project in the Bronx, I believe. And so maybe you can talk a little bit more big picture in terms of the way that you're thinking about how you're working. Easy question.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I would say, there's, we can only hope. And what we hope, I mean, as much as we love working on Fire Island, we have to think that at some point, saturated with Coughlin Scheel houses, and they're not going to get
It's not enough.
Yeah, that's, I
Gotta
mean,
come down my way.
yeah, I will. But yeah, I think, we can, if you can build a house there, you can design a house there, you can design a house anywhere. We'd love to do more, houses anywhere. But I think personally, we'd also like to branch out. We do commercial work, we do institutional work, so we'd like to broaden that, of course. But yeah,
Evolution is tough.
it's tough, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Because like you said, for young offices,
you know,
it is hard because it's hard to know where the next project is going to come from. So
we had a kind of a really small projects, and then all of a sudden, like one day the phone rings, and then the next month, like the phone rings, and so like the office, like we, it's a pretty lean, practice. It's the two of us. So we take out the trash, we make the coffee, we do the invoicing, we do the rhino, we do the rendering, we do the diagram, we do everything, and then we come here and teach. And so, how would the office evolve? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would love to say like, we would have more people. I think that we're lucky that most of our all of our clients, all of the work we do is interesting to us. So we're lucky that we don't right now have to take work that seems ridiculous. But I remember one of my old bosses used to say, when you're young and starting out, people come to you because they need you. And then once you get a little more established, people come to you because they want you. And I feel like we might be like on the tipping point of that. You know, maybe the summer didn't feel like that, maybe now it does. So the evolution seems like it's slow, it's fast, it's slow.
I've always been impressed by, yeah, even when we went to visit the house, your relationships with everybody, like true collaborators, right? Like that we went by one of the houses that had been completed and the client, just, I don't know. Way. And I think that that's attributed to your ability to really listen to your client's needs, right? And so I think that we don't talk about that enough, right? Like we talk about like skills, like the skills that we learn in terms of like draw and make things. But one of the things I noticed that is an amazing skill in your office is the kind of relationship building that you create. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is sort of inherent in residential work. Really, we're getting to know the nitty gritty of lives, and yeah.
I mean, we know, we learn a lot about them, about our clients, and they feel comfortable talking to us and sharing with us but ultimately they know that like there's a lot at stake with what they're trying to do. Most of them will only ever be able to do this once in their lifetime, and they're doing it for future generations. So it's like it's a big deal, and kind of like trust us with that. Like we feel that gravity, and so we're usually all ears. We usually bend over backwards. You know, if this is like a commercial client, like an institutional type of client, it would be very like clinical. You know, but it's not. It's never gotten like a marriage counseling session. But you know, there's often disagreements about what should go in the house. We're just kind of sitting as somewhat referees on the side. And I think it's a trust thing. And I think the more we work with clients, the more we understand how to understand when to say something and when not to say something. I think that's something that's not how to like not manage clients, how to work with clients in a positive way for a positive outcome, so that they know that everyone's working towards the same goal. It's just something that is not taught. It can't be taught in school. It's only that I
Yeah, I'll pass the mic to the audience.
Hello, my name is Kathy. I was going to say one thing about mentioning that you guys are a small office. Have you thought about having student interns?
We always, and Lita, I mean, yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Keep you in mind. And then another thing I wanted to talk about is just how you guys explain how you get across the funds for your housing. So I forgot the name of the one that you said was like the Tootsie Roll, which I thought was very interesting. And then also with this last house, the top house, how you describe using the form of the original house to create the second one by changing the orientation. Now, for the ones that were just simply boxes, as you described as a decorated box, was that something that the client wanted, or did you not have like wiggle room to play with the composition?
Yeah, it's a wiggle room, but like also we definitely take pride in our planning from like a diagrammatic planning point of view, how the house functions. Like that's just as much of a design challenge to us. So the ones that are really kind of like conflicted without having room for personality formally, like we definitely design the plan with an equal amount of interest. And yeah, some of them tend to be more sculptural and some of them can't, they just can't. So, it's a functional design challenge.
Yeah, and out there, when we were just talking to another client today, a lot of it depends on whether they want a roof deck or not. Roof decks are allowed in some of the towns and some not, and then with a roof deck, it's a flat roof, and then a square form. If you don't, you know, there's different rules for whether the roof is sloped or whether it's flat. And some of the code actually, you know, prioritizes the houses to have sloped roofs because they're trying to get sunlight to the neighboring lots. So sometimes it's just simply between those two factors of the program and whether they have a sloped roof or not. If the opportunity is there to do a more interesting roof, then we try to do it. Yeah.
Thank you. And my last thing I wanted to say is that my favorite house is the surf house. I really liked how you guys incorporated the outside architecture with the interior. And I like how you guys designed the egresses, which I took a picture of and I will be using for my own project.
You should also join the field trips.
Hello, my name is Jamesi, and I wanted to ask, since it seems like you get a lot of your clients on Fire Island through word of mouth, do you ever get them asking like, oh, I want my house to look like that one? And if you do, how do you then navigate and be like, okay, I can do you one better, or here's what works for you in this context?
That's a great practical question. Yes. A lot of times we go in and tell clients that we're hoping that each house can have its individual personality. Been lucky enough that most of them are different enough that if they look at the body of art, the anticipation is they're going to get something a little different. But you know, they might say like, I like that house, and how can I have something like it? But then their lists of like what they want out of their lifestyle out there usually just like throws that out. I like the house and it has this. And if you want to, I need to have a roof there. Okay, well, like that right off the bat can kind of change the conversation.
More often it's about, we talk about wood siding like every 4 weeks. They all like this look, but this takes a lot of maintenance. No one wants to do maintenance out there. Is one of the main things. We obviously love, you know, quality materials, natural materials. So
Yeah, and I was gonna say, despite Professor Holmes' comment, things could be a lot worse. Like, if you've ever been to the Jersey Shore, you know, like, architecture is still highly respected out there, and most of our clients want something relatively significant. And so that, I mean, I think that's a credit to the culture.
In addition to that, since you're on that topic, I feel like even with your guys' design, you don't go kind of out there with it. You still keep it contextual, even though there doesn't seem to be a board or like a community board of people telling you like, you can't build that. That's too upfront. That's too lavish. It doesn't fit in this area. Your architecture, it fits. It stays in the context.
Here first.
Hello, my name is Cindy, and one of the things that I was wondering while you were explaining how you were running your company is how are you sort of managing all of it? Because I feel like it's a lot of work, and I feel like a lot of skills are required to make it happen, and you guys seem to be doing it really flawlessly. And I was just wondering, do you guys like hire structural engineers? Are you guys, you know, also doing some engineering stuff? Are you like how is this coming all together so amazingly?
yeah, we have had employees in the past, so it's not, it hasn't always just been the 2 of us. Yes, we do work with consultants on everything. We do not do any of the structural engineering ourselves. We work with expediters. On larger projects, there's MEP engineers involved sometimes. you know, in more complicated cases, sometimes there's like land use specialists. So we don't do it all, we do as much as we can, but we both had experience working at smaller firms where we were able to learn to do a lot of it ourselves. I think just as like a career trajectory, I think we've both been working that way to have learned to handle a lot. But currently, yeah, we might be expanding because we're gonna need. But yeah, we do get. So,
And we have, one of the reasons that another reason we do get work out there is we now understand who the team needs to be out there. Right? So you can't hire an engineer that doesn't do houses on a beach. We can't teach them the distinction. You can't teach them how to do that. The expediters out there that work in the town, but they know all the people. Like, so we now know who all those people. We know the trash department. We thought about opening a general contracting, like, not really, but we know all of the kind of like facets now, and that also is a huge advantage for us to clients. They know that we understand the system. So, working with not just consultants, but the right consultants with the right projects.
thank you.
You also like to get to know each other's expectations, right? But to build a good relationship with a contractor, those are the processes
Hi. I was, the whole time I was kind of curious, because you're right across from beach houses on Mohawk, right? And just the idea of that's already rarefied air, and now we're kind of having this difficulty getting materials and building. How much of a markup is there to build on fire?
I don't know, like, really what numerically it is, but it's
I meant
substantial.
yeah.
It's significant.
Yeah.
That's what,
So much so that I know people who have gone about finding their own means of transporting materials.
yeah,
As in buying barges in tugboats. Matt has done it twice.
yeah,
He does it for a little while, he's like, this is stupid, sells it, and then does it again, because
Yeah.
the evil empire owns the transportation. You're
Right.
constantly
that's what I figured, like every time you
From a
mention
contractor
something, I'm like, click, yeah, you
From a
know.
contractor standpoint, looking at that number, that you're paying Fire
Yeah.
Island Ferries to move these materials.
And there's only a handful of contractors that actually do that work, and they get to pick and choose what they want to do. And
There's like an unwritten law that you can't, like, a lot of people are like, well, why don't you just drive it across the beach in the off season? Because you can contractors can drive on the beach with a permit to the job site and
Yeah,
from
yeah.
the mainland. Like, it's like, why can't?
Yeah.
So they also, there's this kind of like restriction on, like, the Fire Island Ferry Company owns the rights to transport materials to the beach over a certain size.
Yeah.
So, I mean, nothing against Fire Island Ferry, like, it's wonderful and they have quite a thorough operation. But yeah, I would say it's probably twice as much money than the main.
I was imagining at least.
Yeah. And the builder is also, you know, there's different levels of builders out there, and the builder has their own kind of level of work and price that they kind of.
Seems like they could just be,
Well, so recently that was the case, but now immediately it's not the case. The building market has slowed down now substantially. So much so that contractors are like not building houses for the first time in years after. And a lot of the work that we started with was most of it was COVID based,
yeah.
where families had a desire to spend more time at the beach and be outside in the air and be away from the city. So a lot of them put a lot of money and resources into their houses to stay there. And I think that from what we've seen, that market is kind of, it's gone. Like, everybody's done. So
I was also curious about other construction, the facade, the exterior materials. What kind of range is there? Or is it just basically?
Yeah, I mean, this is the reason we like these river sightings, increasingly out there people are using, plastic-based
Yeah.
siding. And we might use some liquid, but it's not,
Yeah,
it's not the nice looking kind, so, yeah, and Ocean Beach actually now has regulations against using vinyl and plastic siding. But yeah, a lot of people do turn to that because, it's actually really dangerous. And the wood is a lot to maintain, but then these horses don't, they could be injured, they could,
right.
they're on fire, right? Yeah. We could show you something.
All right, I'd like to pass them to you. Thank you.
No gotchas. Well, one thing, I don't know if Professor brought that up, but I honestly believe that fire outings, stay away from it as you mentioned, Trs. My name's Luke. I'm a real estate director of fire outings. I go against that. But I also, before that, was a merchant mariner, so I ran ships and specifically dredges. So we rebuilt these beaches, and I did that for 12 years, way up to captain and that whole thing. And just he was mentioned trying to bring it back. I mean, that wind tunnel's there. And my family has lost a oceanfront house in Fair Harbor. Perfect storm. We have a video of it rolling out to sea. Mind blowing how long it floats. But I guess I just don't understand that I think personally, having been in a number of the houses that Matt designed, they're doing fantastic work, and I think there needs to be more of that. Going to the vinyl siding, it's an eyesore, and it's very refreshing to see these new houses, popping up that are kind of an ode to old fire.
And I will say, I give a lot of credit to our clients, because never has a client come and said, I want something that I can understand.
Yeah.
Like most of our clients are, they're city families, and they know what's going on. And a lot of them have an eye for design. So they're challenging clients, but they're also, it's very rewarding because they're already bringing it to high level. Yeah.
Hello, my name is JL. I have a question about your communication with clients and with people, construction people, because it seems challenging. Have you ever gotten close to losing a client or connection, and how did you deal with that?
That's it. I feel like every job before we get it can go either way sometimes, because there are, just like there's 5 contractors out there, there's like 5 architects, right? And you know that everybody's talking to the same 5 architects, and everybody brings a different thing, and so you kind of have to, I don't know, hit it. One very recently that I was sent a proposal and just don't hear from them. And you just wonder, like, was that it? And for sure we've lost jobs. And in a way, like, it's not the worst thing in the world, because if the relationship's not right, at least one party can recognize that for whatever reason, and then maybe it wasn't a good relationship to start with. I can't say that we've had any like mid-project trauma. We generally, like, all of our clients they're really good people. The builders we work with out there are really good builders. So I don't know if we've ever had a traumatic mid-project experience.
You are comfortable, guys get along with and
Yeah.
make the project work.
We try, yeah, at the end of the day, like, everybody has to shake hands. Like, that is like the bottom basic, right?
It doesn't serve it, it's not doing that. So, yeah.
We definitely
Luck.
pick our battles.
Yeah.
You know, we know what's important to us. And if, you know, something comes along and so I would really like to do this different, we kind of, where is that on the scale of priorities for our industry? And if it's not something, we let it go. We kind of fight another day. But if it's something that's important, we usually try and figure out a way to make it.
Maybe let this be the last question and then we can just end it.
So I would assume that each client had their own budget. What would you say, which house was the most expensive?
Well, you have to kind of think of it on a cost per square foot basis. And you have to consider the timeline, COVID too. Because towards the end of COVID, materials and everything was extremely insane. It was impossible. You couldn't get, people were complaining, I can't get this refrigerator, I can't get. So I think that actually plays into it more than, I mean, it's a function of economy, right? Like right now, I said that like, things are a little quiet out there. So prices go down. But out of the ones that we built, were they all by, they were all about the same per square foot. And we, you know, we don't go crazy. We don't order like European foods. Like we stick to kind of the basics. We try and be a little bit modest about it, like fight the battles that we can fight. But I would say like this one was a huge, you know, a lot of the times the renovations, the really heavy renovations are almost the same cost as building a house because there's so much surgery that comes into keeping the patient alive while you're sewing on new limbs. Right? Like sometimes maybe it's easier to just
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, let's conclude the event here. Let's give a big hand to Paul and just a quick announcement for the students. We have NCAR workshop next Thursday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. It's going to happen here, and we're going to have NCAR associates and all the licensed architects come in, and then they're going to walk you through the licensure procedures. So please join that event. Pizza will be served. But thank you for coming, and then there's some more food if you haven't eaten yet, and then have an amazing night. Thank you.
Are you guys leaving now? It's alright. Yeah, I'm finished. I'm staying. Look, it's online.
No, yeah, but it's going to be great. So if you're interested in licensure. Well, for this semester, it's just one.
Oliver, yeah. Tall, yeah. Really?
Yes.
Here?
Yes.
Oh.
She was here like earlier today.
What did you do?
Did you all sign in?
I did. Before I my name is Seungho. I fight in
Good to see you, and I'm so glad you're doing so well. Way more yeah.
So you're doing good. You're on track. Yes.
Right now.
We're gonna have the. Yeah, good question.
I like it when we let this stuff because
I actually was changed.
yeah, she'll find her.
Yeah, I figured that.
Since I opened it's really hard to go into.
I don't know how.
She starts to like.
It's such a
I have a partner. I mean, he does a lot of stuff. Interesting. When we're on he said his ball is the museum one, that's not my project, but that's really that one. I like the facade project that I worked on. Find me on LinkedIn. Yeah.
I was there.
Thank you. You should also join the
That's only. There was a control there. And it broke through.
They said that he heard it for the first time. That next week we have a workshop. I also